Hi, and welcome to Hippo Brain. Here is where we have hippo-sized conversations with people with hippo-sized brains. Today is a very interesting guest, Praveen. Praveen is the head of product at The Ken, and he is also the man behind Nutgraph, their newsletter of sorts. But we will chat with him and we will understand and get some insights into that. Let us start with a very interesting question. Praveen, welcome to the show. And the first question, which I've always wanted to ask, the Ken is essentially one article a day and it's on email. Why the hell do you require a product head? Go for it, Praveen.
Hi, Javid. Hi, Rajesh. Thanks so much for having me here. Okay, I like it. Provocative question right from the start. So first, it's true that the Ken started off as a one story a day publication. At that point in time, we did I think the thinking behind it is also important. We did one story a day. And the reason why we did one story a day was because we felt that there was a fire hose of information that was being thrown out. So as a result, we felt that less is sometimes better. Sometimes it's harder to do one story a day than it is to do 10 stories a day. We started off that way. Since then, we have evolved. We have gone into a separate edition for Southeast Asia as well. We have gotten into a daily newsletter called Beyond the First Order. We have a weekend newsletter called The Nutgraph, and now recently a podcast. The reason why we look at this is because, see, the Ken is an organization that looks at 2-3 things, and it's some things are very core to its DNA, and primarily 3 things. First, it's a company that tries to blend product, tech, and media. And there's a very simple reason for that. When you start off and try to build something in a subscription-based product, a lot of publications do this. They start off and say, okay, it's time to do subscriptions. So they write beautiful stuff, put it behind a paywall, and then wait. And nothing really happens. Because what happens is, a lot of the stuff on the internet is really geared for growth when you have the traditional levers of growth work really well when it is open and free. Take, for example, something like, say, search. Google search works really well when your content is open and free, and so people search for it and they come on board. Referrals. People basically click on a link and come there with the expectation that they can read it immediately. Or even anything like all of these things are geared to open. The minute you make things closed, the notion that I will put great content and I'm just going to wait and everybody is going to come and discover and you're all going to make a lot of money and be very rich and successful does not really work. So that is one of the reasons why it's important to have product thinking. It's important to have tech thinking. It's important to have all of these things in addition to having really powerful and really great journalism. So I think that is primarily the reason. We can go into it in more detail, but fundamentally that is the reason why it's really important to do products as well.
So Praveen, Rajesh here. Hi, everyone. A key point I want to ask you is, at Ken, what does a product manager do? What is your role? So there's the journalist part, which I understand. There are the tech guys who are getting the website done and all of that.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Right. Okay. So it's important again to go back to, I'll go into historical context a little bit. So one of the advantages of the Ken is that we were what I call a subscription first publication, which means that we are privileged not to be a legacy publication that has advertising and other things, and then deciding, oh, now we should do subscriptions because everybody is doing subscriptions. And then you are stuck with this difficult decisions on, well, I have this stuff that is giving me a lot of clicks, but do I put it behind a paywall? So you don't have to worry about all of those things. The founders basically started off and said, look, we believe that we are going to be subscription first, and that's our primary way to work. The second thing is that the composition and the background of the founders also matter, because a lot of the Ken that has been built is built in the image of the founders and the people who started it. So if you look at it, someone like, say, Seema is the editor of the Ken, and she's someone who has a great amount of experience in newsrooms, right from Mint and in Forbes, and she's written a book about Biocon. So she's like a reporter. She understands this really, really well. Old school journalism, understanding of how stories are written, narratives, etc. Then you have someone like, say, Sumant. Sumant is a serial entrepreneur who has basically run several companies, and most of them are SaaS companies. So his view of the world and his view of subscriptions is through the lens of a SaaS company, which is that, so he's the one who's constantly telling us what's the MRR, what's the ARR, all of these SaaS metrics that people typically don't really get. Then you have Rohin. So Rohin is really, really interesting because he manages to straddle both worlds. He's in the world where he's been a journalist for like several years at Forbes, understands the power of great storytelling, great narratives, etc. But is also someone who's extremely savvy with product, tech, and everything else. He's run his own company. He's someone, even the earliest website that the Ken launched, Rohin, I think, coded a big part of it himself. He's extremely comfortable in code and writing it down, etc. So that is the first part, which is that this yin and yang between the ability to tell great stories and the understanding of the business side of it is like really important. So that is the first part of it. So for me, the reason why I came on board is because for me, this yin and yang matters. I suspect that if you took someone with a complete core understanding of product and came on board to the Ken, I think it may not have worked that well, because fundamentally at some level, our product is our stories itself. And the good part about the three founders and me is that we basically, all of us write. We write in some form or the other. Sometimes we write a story, sometimes we write emails, sometimes we write newsletters, but that part is really important. So if you ask me, what does a product person do at the Ken? Product person does 3-4 things. First, you basically have a understanding of what drives growth. And that is really important, because you are doing all of these things, you're putting it behind a paywall. How do you drive growth with all of those things? What levers do you pull? How do you get that to work? Sometimes you have to do experiments to drive growth. And those experiments to drive growth may not necessarily be traditional form of experiments where you say, oh, on this, I'm going to change this, change that, etc. Sometimes those experiments are going to come down to writing different types of stories, writing different types of newsletters. So you need somebody who can understand that balance between all of this. And so I try to do that. In many ways, this is a job that I've been waiting for and I've been dreaming for a long, long time. I suspect that if it was a job where I was doing only product stuff and completely cut off from the editorial writing side, I may not have enjoyed it so much. If I came into this job where I just said, oh, I'm only going to write these stories and not worry about the business side, I don't think I would have enjoyed it myself either. So I think I'm really privileged and quite happy that I'm in this world where I do both of these things. So what does a product person do? A product person solves all of these problems. And it's really important to have this balance between the two, because traditionally in the media industry, there has been great tension between these two worlds. There's great tension between the editorial side and the business side. And the only way you can make this work is to have someone who probably understands this tension really well and is able to straddle those two worlds, which is what I think the founders do in their own way. And hopefully I try to do on a day-to-day basis.
Any example of, you said a product guy drives growth, and I know I'm moving a little bit more into your product head and all, and if you could just tell us, how does a product guy drive growth? What are the things that you wake up every day and say, ye karna hai?
So I wish it was that simple, where you wake up and say, we're going to do this and it's done. No. So I'll give a few examples. So for instance, see, one of the things, okay, again, historical context. So I'm a person who's really big on history. Okay, so I'm going to keep going back to historical context in a lot of these things, which is why I write a lot of stuff about the Roman Republic and some of these other things. Anyway, so historical context is this. One of the things that I've always told people is it's really important to understand why the media industry is the way it is today. So if you look at it, I think there's no arguing the fact that people say there is a crisis in the media industry. Of course, there's all these things about fake news and all that, but even that, there's a huge crisis with respect to business models, which is that you have a lot of companies that are in the media, and quite frankly, not many of them are making money. And the reason they're not making money is because for a long time, they have been heavily reliant on advertising. And for a long time, advertising was seen as the great big hope, where people looked at advertising and said, this is the way we are going to win. Then the internet came, then the mobile revolution came, and a lot of these things suddenly just got destroyed. So you have a lot of stuff which was like owned by you. If you are a media company, which suddenly becomes, it's like what they call the variable cost of putting an additional piece of content on the internet just dropped to zero. So at that point in time, what ends up happening with a lot of media companies is they start trying to figure out how can we do this. So for a while, if you remember, there was this entire time around 2014, 2015, where people thought that BuzzFeed is going to be the answer, where native advertising would be the answer. And I speak as someone who has been I have built ad tech products for like 5 years. And so the way how I tell people is I've come from the dark side to the light, and I'm here to tell you that it's not going to work. That side of the world is not going to win. The only people who will win in that world are probably the platform players, someone like a Facebook, someone like a Google. They will win, but publishers, probably not. So when you come to this side, but I have also been very critical about the media industry, because the example that I tell people is that the media industry is the only industry in the world where the people involved in creating the product actively stay away and despise the people who are involved in the money making part of it. And this never happens, right? In fact, the only industry where this happens is art, where artists just create something and they say, we don't care about this. Somebody else has to like make money out of this, not me. And I think for a long time, the media industry saw what they were creating as art. And so that is the first part of it. It sounds really harsh, but it's true. The second part is that, so let's say, for instance, you come in and you basically say, okay, let's try to figure out a way to make this work. There is it's very tempting to basically get in and say, okay, so here's what you're going to do. We're going to take the stories that do really well, get subscriptions, and we're going to pass it on back to the editorial team and say, these stories did subscriptions really well, so go ahead and write more stories like that. But you see, that's also not that straightforward, because what ends up happening is that there is again historical context, because for a long time, media companies, when they came across this crisis, they basically did this thing where they would go to journalists inside the organization and say that the more number of clicks your story gets, the more you get paid, right? So they go after them and do that. And so that is when all of these things start coming, where you people writing clickbaits and they start writing these headlines. And it is quite devastating inside a newsroom when you go and tell people who are involved in creating great stories, which, yes, there is definitely an art component to it. There is a creative component to it, to go and say that if you get 100 clicks, you get paid this much. If you get 200 clicks, you get paid this much. So there's a lot of resistance to that as well. So primarily my job is to try to figure out how do you strike this balance between these two worlds. I can give a few examples on how we try. So for instance, one of the things that we did, I can speak for myself when you basically talk about something. You mentioned the nut graph, so I'll talk about that because that's something that I was involved in personally. So when we started the nut graph, so this is the reasons how the nut graph began. At that point in time, we had a weekend product that we had. It was called the Ken on Weekends, which would come every Saturday. So the thinking at that point in time from a product perspective was that, look, we have these really like investigative, hard-hitting stories from Monday to Friday. And maybe Saturday is probably a time when people are like a little relaxed. It's not the pandemic. People are sitting at home on Saturdays. So let's give them something to read that is hopefully a little more laid back, a little more leisurely reads, etc., which comes from the newspaper industry, which is also, if you see on weekends, you get like lounge and this and that, etc. For better or for worse, we tried that out for nearly a year. It didn't really work out so well. It didn't really give us, it's not, I think my general assessment is that it's okay, but it's not something that people generally pay for. So we were about to wind it up. And we basically said, okay, we're going to wind this up. This is not going to work out. And at that point in time, we had a slot open on Saturday. So we were not publishing anything on Saturday. And I think we thought, okay, let's not do anything on Saturdays. So I was like really insistent, no, we should do something. And I walked into Seema's office. At that time we had offices. And I basically made this, like, I prepared myself with this big speech saying that we have to do something on Saturday. We have to be on top of things. And I started, and then Seema stopped me and said, what do you want to do? And I said, no, we should do a newsletter that looks at the week. And she was like, listen, you want to do it? I said, yeah, definitely. Why not? She's like, okay, do it. And what I thought was like this big discussion that I have to argue with the editor just ended in 2 minutes, because I mean, fortunately, that's how the Ken is, because when you have like a idea and you have like a solid this thing, you say, yeah, sure, try it out. Let's see what happens. And then of course we pulled in Rohan, and then we said, okay, let's try this out. And we didn't even have a name for it. And we said, how do we do this? We said, okay, probably going to be this. Let's iterate and figure it out. So we did like one edition. We didn't have a name. We put some stuff. We had like a bunch of things. Somewhere like in the third or fourth edition, we put out a survey, and we basically said, what kind of stuff are you looking for? What do you want? Suggest names. And there was one very interesting question we put in the survey. We put a question in the survey saying that the newsletter was free, by the way, at that point in time, because we were not confident enough to charge people for it. And we said that, assuming that this thing that we describe is going to be a paid product, would you pay for it? And I think around 20% of the respondents said, yes, we will pay extra for it, which for me was like a huge revelation, because 20% of any set of audience saying that, yeah, we will pay for something is voluntarily, is pretty crazy. So then it was like, okay, so now we have to figure out what the product is. So now over the next 1 year, every week I would try something different. And I made a lot of mistakes. There were things that we did, which we looked at the numbers and said, okay, this is not really working. But then after that kept looking at some of those things. And I think I was also heavily influenced by a lot of stuff that I read and watched on a day-to-day basis. So I would like for instance, I might be reading Matt Levine, or I might be reading Ben Thompson, or I might be watching an Aaron Sorkin movie. And then I suddenly think about it and say, oh, this story of Geo that happened last week is actually exactly like this thing that I read about the Roman Republic, which I'm going to put in here. So I did this something, and sometimes it would really work. Sometimes I would do something visual, sometimes I would do something else. And I had a team that was with me that basically said, okay, we are going to help you make this work. So my routine is always that on someone like a Friday, I figure this out, I send it to my desk team, who, bless their heart, wait for it at like 10, 11 in the night on a Friday, edit it, send it back to me. They give me feedback, and then we put it out the next time, we watch. And then we look at feedback, we look at how people wrote it. And so over time, we got it to a point where we're really confident that, okay, now we think we can make it paid. And we did that. We clustered users and said, what do they read? Do they, as opposed to the nut graph, as opposed to the Beyond the First Order, our daily newsletter, as opposed to our stories, how do they read it? What's happening? Where is their affinity? And we got better at it, and we figured out pricing. So these are like some examples. There are many, many, many more examples, but these are some examples in which we try to make things work.
You know, it's fascinating listening to you, and was reminded of my own story. I started probably what was India's first paid media product, paid only. Well, in 1995, when I launched India World, which was India's first website.
Right.
I was clear. I didn't have any other way. This was about a few weeks after Yahoo had launched and eBay had launched.
Yes.
And I had a paid service, $59 a year, prime targeted NRIs. Internet hadn't even been launched in India.
Wonderful. Okay.
So I had no way to publicize it. I was coming after 2 failed ventures. So I just put on news, sent out to friends. People came back and said, hey, you know what, $60 is too much.
Yes.
So I dropped it to $29 and then $20 in the space of 1 month. And it stayed that way for about a year plus, year and a half, for about 5,000 subscribers. Then I realized en route, you know, I used to look at the email IDs who used to subscribe, the very early days of the internet. And I said all of GE in the US had 1 subscriber.
Yeah.
And then I realized that there were people who it was email ID and password.
Yeah.
So I realized that this is not going to work.
One guy subscribes and sends it to the entire office, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we stopped growing basically because an organization would subscribe and one person and then share it with everyone. And anyway, then after that, I switched to free and advertising led. And I sold the business post 5 years later, but we were ad led. I stopped the subscription part that time, but I think you've created a fantastic product. I think where people are paying for it now. You also have copycats coming up, of course, in India. So I want to ask you, Praveen, that how much? I mean, you talked as a product manager. How much is the sort of fluidity between you of course track everything that's happening, what people are reading, what's working, what's not working. That feedback goes back to editorial. So how is this balance between the two? Is there a lot of discussion saying, look, these stories worked, so maybe we should do more of this, or these types of stories are not working? Because the way I looked at when I subscribed to Ken, my logic was very simple. That even if I get, and I use this for every subscription, I subscribe to a lot of paid news, especially in tech, is that if I get one good idea in a year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
One good idea, it's worth more than 2,500 rupees. And I tell that to people. I said, what would I pay to get one good idea? An FT subscription, Financial Times, is whatever, 30,000, 40,000 rupees a year.
Yeah.
And it's the cost of an idea, because that's your source of inputs. Maybe someone's comment, someone's story, which you can then take back and apply internally. That's how I looked at it. So I'm sure there are others like me, but how do you all look at, from the product inputs to the editorial side?
Right. So this is quite honestly, first of all, Rajesh, the first thing that struck me was that as you were telling the story is that some problems have still not been solved for like 20 years. I can see this thing about having one ID and you distribute it to everybody else. Yeah, we face some of that as well. Of course, things are like, we have solved it in other ways where, because we have like a mobile app, and the mobile app is like, we try our level best to make sure that the mobile app is something that is not just an addendum product, but a co-product. So without the mobile app, it's almost like a very substandard experience. So those are all advantages that we have today that you probably didn't have at that point in time. See, in terms of the feedback going back to editorial, it's a tricky problem. There's no doubt about it. So here's what we do. We try to do 2-3 things. First, we are aware that qualitative feedback and quantitative feedback should be mixed in together. I think that's the first, North Star. I think in general, I've been in the situation where I've seen there's a lot of thinking in the product side, especially if you are in a non, journalism kind of a background, you probably really diminish the qualitative side of it because you don't have a clear appreciation that there is a lot of art and craft that goes into writing these stories. And it's not just a question of, it's not like a Swiggy or an Uber where you move food from one place to another or cabs. It's not that way. It's not as simple as that. So I think so the first thing you understand is there is always a mix of quality and quantity. So the first thing is that if you look at, say, quality, one of the things that we do is we have a comment section for every story that we have. So every story that we put, there is a comment section, and we basically try to do as many things on the product side to make sure that the comments are things that people think about. We don't want people to just shoot off. We don't want it to become like, for lack of a better example, YouTube comments. So what we do is we try our best to make sure that there are deliberate friction that we have introduced. We make it very difficult for people to comment. So the first time you want to comment, you have to send, I want to request to comment. We approve everybody who requests, but we want you to do that. Okay. And the second time when you put a comment is that we make sure that it's moderated. We always want to moderate every comment, and then before we put that, because we believe that comments should add to the discussion. So so that means that if people just writing comment that says great article, generally doesn't make it. Even people writing stuff like bad article does not make it. So there are a lot of things where people write good things also we don't put there, but we like it. So that is the first part. We want to make sure that happens. That's one. Two is we want to reduce friction as much as possible for people to give instant comments as well. So when you get the first impression, because the thing is when you finish reading a story, you want to make it a little difficult for people to give you comments, because what happens is you want them to absorb the whole entirety of the whole thing and then process it and then write it. But on the other hand, when you give a story immediately, there is always a first instinctive reaction that you have, which you want to make really easy to get. So the way we do that is, let's say, for instance, we send an email that basically says, hey, here is our story of the day. And as you just read that, I'm sure there is an immediate reaction that you have. And if you just hit reply and send it, we get it. So every email that we send out does not go to it's not a no reply, it does not go this thing, it comes back to us. And sometimes more often than not, we try to reply back. Of course, now our volume is really high, so it's difficult to reply back to everyone, but we get that. So that's the first thing, introducing friction at one place, reducing friction at other, and understanding where that balance is. The second thing that we do is we launched this product recently called Polls and Surveys, where what we do is that if there is a story, let's say we are writing a story on, say, I don't know, I'll just pick an example. Let's say something like, say, Cred, and we're talking about Cred is doing this, Cred is doing that as a business model. Somewhere in the middle of that, we put a poll that basically says, if you had like a 10,000 points in Cred, where would you use this? Okay, this is not sponsored by Cred or anything like that. It's for us to understand what consumers are thinking. And sometimes they just look at this and say, oh, option B, and then you're like, okay, interesting. So that sometimes feeds into the editorial side where you understand that, okay, this is the kind of mindset that we have. Of course, we do subscriber surveys regularly. So those are other things that we do. On the quantitative side, we typically try to avoid looking at things like, say, what subscriptions are driven by stories. We know it, but we don't index too heavily on that. Two things we index on and we look at closely is, we look at something called completion rates, which means that if 100 people start reading a story, how many people make it to the very end? Because that gives you an indication of because fundamentally you want to give things back to editorial that they can control. Giving them things like, oh, this kind of story led to subscriptions, this kind of story didn't lead to subscriptions, now you decide, is difficult. But if you tell them that these kind of stories with this kind of a narrative leads to people finishing the story, then you're like, okay, that gives you an indication of, was my length optimal? Is this narrative clear? So things like that is what we tend to play with. But I would be the first to say that we are still figuring this out, and we try different experiments. Sometimes we try giving little additional information, less information, and we try to figure out what works, what doesn't work.
Yeah, that's what you're saying is interesting. And it's always difficult to give certain amount of info to a journalist, because some really wise guy had once told me in PR, said, you know what journalists write for? They don't write for the reader. they write for other journalists. And I don't think he was being charitable to them because you're right, it is an art form. And even if you write well, you think of it as an art form.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think most journalists at the start would end up hating you because you're giving a lot more data to what is essentially their art. But let me just flip it over and ask you a few questions.
Sure.
Any tips, learnings, thinking, understandings on emails? You've been writing emails for some time. So what have you learned in terms of what is a good response? How do you think it works through? Because I think in email, you don't see really completion rate or scroll rate, etc. So that's one thing. So how do you get your feedback, and what do you think runs and works in an emailer? So if I were to write an emailer, what's the best way to write it? And second, similarly, anything that you've learned or understood, or any of our viewers or listeners would want to understand, what makes a great article? How does the narrative get broken up? So on both sides, if I could eat your brains on that.
Right. I'll tell you what I do know, because a lot of this, obviously the learning lies with journalists and people who've been writing it and frankly are much, much better than I am. But I'll tell you what little we have learned at the Ken and what I have seen as such. See, the thing about emails, again, the context is this. So the context when the Ken began is that when we wanted to send out those morning emails, so what we do is every morning at 8 o'clock, we publish a story and we send this one email out to all our subscribers that say, this is the story. And typically the email is written by somebody at the Ken who has not written the story. So it could be another writer, somebody else in desk. Sometimes I write it, introducing it and saying that, oh, this is why you should read the story. And so I'm telling you as a reader of the story, what I really liked about it and why I think you should read it. And here's the context behind it. So now the thing is that email is very interesting because that email comes out at like 8 in the morning and that email is completely in plain text. There isn't a single HTML component in it. We don't even put our logo on it, right? And we always start every email with good morning with the name of the person. There's only I tell this to everyone, there's only 2 data points we collect from our subscribers. People always ask me, what is the gender makeup of your subscribers? And I truthfully say, I don't know, because we don't collect the information. We value privacy really highly. There's only 2 information we collect. One is the email address, because you have to send this email. And 2, we collect their name because we need to know what to call them when we send this email. So now the reason why we do this is because, see, the thing is, email is also, and I'm sure both of you are aware about this, and many of your listeners probably do, which is that email had reached a point where it had been like tortured and used as a marketing channel to the point where a lot of rules started to come around. It said that, oh, you should put like this HTML, you should put like this beautiful thing, and you should try this, you should try that, and make it very immersive. And so now email reached a point where everybody started seeing it as mostly junk and promotions and everything else. It started becoming like your physical email, that snail mail that you get. You don't even look at it anymore because you're like, it's all just like nonsense. So I think what the Ken tried was, we looked at this and said, okay, if all of this noise is there, how do we cut through all of this noise? And the only way we can cut through all of this noise is we basically wanted to take email back to a time when you looked forward to your emails. And that, for someone like me, is probably the 2005, 2006 era, before mobile phones, when a friend emails you, you see that and you know it, and you're like, oh, it's just a subject, and starts off with, hey, Praveen, and just like tells an email. That's a short email. So without any HTML and all that. So that is the first thing. So I think the main learning I would say is that if there is something that is like extremely cluttered and noisy, it's actually a great opportunity because you can cut through all of it in a way that is very different. So that is our first learning about email. Now, the other thing about email is, of course, in terms of email newsletters, the thing that I always tell, what we have learned about email newsletters is that 80% of the time, it's really important for you to be predictable, which means that 80% of the time, before someone opens it, a reader must basically know, okay, I know what to expect. If I open Beyond the First Order, or if I open the Nut Graph, I know what to expect. 80% of the time, it's going to be about this one thing. You're going to break this down, tell it in an interesting way. So I'll get educated or informed or entertained or something. But 20% of the time, you should just surprise. You should just like do something completely left field. And it's okay. Sometimes things will hit, sometimes things won't hit. But people always make this mistake of either doing surprise every week, which becomes too much, or becoming too predictable for like 3 years, where by the time people are like, okay, listen, I can't take this anymore. So I think that's our biggest learning with emails. Story narration, again, I think my reporters are the better people to answer this, but I'll tell you what we generally know. Number one, it's very important for us in the stories that we write that we try to see, we always tell people we are always writing a story. One of the words that is banned in the Ken is the word content. You will never see the word content anywhere in the Ken, not in our Slack, not in this thing. When people come and tell this to us in meetings, they're like, oh, I want to help you with your content. I immediately stop them and say stories, not content. Okay. And that's very difficult for people to understand. So, but it's a very important thing because fundamentally we look at everything as a story and we say that, and stories are narratives. We always say that we don't write long form. People say we write long form. We don't write long form. We write narrative, which means that almost every story that we have we like to believe has a protagonist, has a conflict, has obstacles, has desires, motivations. And you'll be surprised how few people see it that way. Business stories, people think are like really dull and really boring, but it isn't. It's actually very interesting. So I think that's our main thing that we do. Then of course you come into all of those things where you say that, look, people always say that your story should not have a point of view. You should have that view from nowhere. And we say, no, we are going to have a point of view. Our stories are going to be directional. Sometimes I get people telling me that you are biased. And we say, of course you're biased. Everyone is biased. Okay. And, but we try to solidify that bias. We try to put reasons why we go in that direction. We try to put a case forward and say, here is what the data says. We put like 3 graphs that show, look, this company is losing money, its cost is going up. Hence, we believe that this is not going to work or going to work, etc. And sometimes we've been wrong, but I would like to believe that the sincerity with which we make our case offsets the times that we've been wrong, hopefully.
I mean, you spent, before you joined the Ken, you spent time working at Myntra and InMobi.
Yeah.
So what are learnings from that period that you have applied? So what have you had to, the learnings that you have kept and what you have had to unlearn, like you talked earlier about the world of ad tech, for example.
Yeah. So see, the thing is, again, the context for that is, I actually was a journalist very briefly for a year when I finished my engineering, and my journalism career ended really suddenly and violently because I got sued for defamation for like an absurd amount. Yeah, it was a fun story. Okay, so no, it wasn't even.
Seriously, you got sued, man.
Yeah, I didn't even write anything defamatory. Anyway, so it was about this. So there was this one. I can tell it now. Now it's not. Now it's okay. There was this one college at the time, because you guys probably know about this, called IIPM. Institute of Planning and Management, and I think they were like,
oh, you were the guy.
No, I was not the guy. There were other people who did it at much bigger scale, but I was one of the people who did it at a much smaller scale and got affected by it, and nobody really noticed because the big guys were the ones who got noticed. Anyway, so I just wrote a reported story on that. It wasn't even like a big thing. I just wrote a story that came in the front page of it was in the supplement of the Economic Times, and there was some, I mean, I'm not going to say that I got sued, but I think there was like some calls were made and some things got a little ugly for a while. And then after that, I just got really like disillusioned with the whole thing and said, okay, look, I'm not going to make this happen. Then after that, I went and did my B school and post B school, but I always wanted to get into the media industry. In fact, even in B school, I went to my placement committee and said that I want to get into media. And they were like, okay, you tell us which company you want and we'll try to get them. And there was a very, very short list, because then I figured out, oh, even if I want to do it, there is no company that will, that I want to work for. So finally, then my reasoning at that point in time was, I said, okay, look, forget this media thing for a minute. If it had to happen, it's fairly obvious that any successful media company has to be based on internet. It has to be internet based, because print is anyway going to be dead very soon. So the one thing that I can do is I can at least go and understand how the internet works and how to basically monetize on the internet, because business models seem like the big problem that media is going to face regardless. So that is why I joined Myntra. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I joined Myntra. So, and Myntra was very interesting because they're solving this very interesting problem on, we want to sell clothes online. We don't know how to do it. Can you help us? Like, yeah, sure. This sounds like an interesting problem. So I got it. So Myntra taught me a lot of things. One, it taught me the entire fundamentals of the internet, which means that I didn't know anything. I didn't even know what conversion was when I joined Myntra. And I was very fortunate that I was in the right place in Myntra. I was in part of customer experience and revenue. So I looked at this combination, looked at this entire thing and said, okay, then I understood a lot of the rules of the internet, which means that, oh, if you try this works, you try this doesn't work. This is how users discover you, this is how users come, etc., which was great. But then after a couple of years, then of course the mobile revolution started. And then again, the same thing started happening with BuzzFeed at that point in time, where a lot of people said that, oh, BuzzFeed is going to be, it's advertising, it's more ad tech. I said, okay, this must be like, let me try this now. So then I joined InMobi. InMobi was fun. I was there for like nearly 5 years. I did stuff where I tried to build products where you could like buy on using an ad, etc. So InMobi was, I think, the thing about InMobi was, even though I came away with the thing that ad tech would not work for media, one of the things I really learned was InMobi taught me product management in ways that I never learned. I mean, I did learn it in Myntra, of course, but it taught me at a big global level how to do it. And I was really fortunate that I worked at a place which was headquartered in India and was building products for the world. So that is very interesting. And when you do that, when you have that level of data, that level of stuff where you have like millions and billions of people clicking on your ads every day, a lot of the problems suddenly start to come in perspective. And I think, and I always say this, I think that InMobi is one of those companies which is extremely resilient, which means that every year, the competitive landscape of InMobi changes. Like if you look at the people whom InMobi was competing with like in 2013 and whom we are competing in 2015 and 2017 and 2019, it's a different list altogether. Because in ad tech is like that. You have like people who come, they just become sudden stars and then they just die. And somebody else comes, and InMobi has seen through all of those. So that resilience is, it's really interesting how you could stay in a company that was that resilient, was able to fight all of these on multiple fronts and innovate, and had a really, really great culture. So those things are things I was really fortunate and quite happy about. So yeah, so fundamentally all of those things helped, because once you join the Ken, you realize perspectives, you understand things, you know the rules are, and you also understand what things don't work. So, but I also had to unlearn a lot. For instance, things that I had to unlearn were, one of the things that you always unlearn is that how you basically look at users. Right? Because for a long time, at least in Myntra and InMobi, there is always this tendency, because it's not their fault, because Myntra was of course really big and InMobi was almost, I wouldn't say it's a B2C company. It was almost like an ad tech middle company. So when you look at users, and especially a small, loyal, extremely passionate user base, the way you build products for them is very different from how you build products for like the masses, which is how Myntra was building. But that is different. And the way you get, and you understand that qualitative feedback is like really important. I can put something out and within like, I just wait. And usually previously in Myntra or in InMobi, I would be looking at the metrics dashboard and staring at it for like 1 hour, 2 hours, trying to see, is it working? Is it not working? At the Ken, once you put something out, I just open my support desk and I keep refreshing that, because that tells me something that the metrics will tell me. It'll tell me in 2 days or 3 days, but this is going to tell me something even better. So those kind of interesting things.
Praveen, support desk means what is that? What do you look at in that?
Yeah, so when I say support desk, I mean that these are all like any email that you send to info@theken.com, support@theken.com, anything that you send comes to a central, this thing. Basically, it's this repository of all emails from subscribers, which is what I'm sitting and looking at when you launch something, because that tells you, you'll be surprised. And people are also extremely invested, because once they give you money, they're not going to just shoot off their mouth. They're going to sit and write. We have had people who have sent in like PPT decks, subscribers, saying that here is my explanation to why your entire flow is this, and you're like, wow, okay, let me just read this for some time. So that is really, really valuable, immensely valuable. So that high touch feedback you wouldn't really get earlier. And I always thought that this was not really useful. I'll be like, people will say what they want to say. I mean, like, no, it's actually quite interesting. You may not agree with them, but they'll tell you things that are quite insightful.
And also, I don't know, I could be totally wrong, but I think your emailer on the Reliance one, that is the first time I think you guys went theoretically crazy viral, and you all got the sense of what it was.
Yeah, so see, the thing is, we have always been writing. So if you look at the core stories have been going viral for a long time. Even right from like 2016, there have been like a lot of stories we've written that have just like exploded. That's the other thing. Our entire marketing budget in the history of the Ken is zero. We have never spent on marketing. We have only relied on word of mouth. And it's much harder to do word of mouth when you're a paywalled, when you write a publication, when you write something that's paywalled, and to expect someone to send it to someone else and say, I know you can't read it, but please do, is a much higher bar than, oh, this is beautiful, watch this video, you can click on it and watch it. So that is different. So we've been doing that for a while. We've written like a lot of amazing stories in the past that people have discovered us on. The thing that you're talking about, Jemit, is the nut graph. So what happened is when we started the nut graph, we tried all kinds of things. We wrote about this, we wrote about that. I think somewhere in the middle, I wrote this one thing. I think the first big thing, if you ask me, was this thing that we wrote on Reliance, where I think it was called The Camel and the Tent, where I basically like made an analogy between how Reliance creep into the telecom sector was exactly like this Arabian fable of a camel going into a tent. And I think that was the first time I tried a story analogy with something, because I always very afraid to try that. I always kept writing it really straight. And I think once I tried this, and I think I sent it to Rohan or my desk or someone, and they were like, yeah, try it out. Let's see what happens. We said, okay. So we tried it out, and that really like exploded. Then we said, okay, let's see what happens here. So we wrote a bunch of stuff about Reliance as well. Other things also became very popular. But then I wrote this thing on the Jio acquisition. So once the Jio got this entire funding from like multiple people, I was quite annoyed because a lot of people were just reporting the numbers and saying 200 million today. They're like, oh, these guys also invest, that guy also invest, that. And nobody was really telling what was Jio thinking about. What was the broader picture? What was the long-term game? And people always make this mistake of thinking that Jio does not have a long-term game. And it does. It has this really great long-term game. And I just said, okay, let me like visually draw out this long-term game. And I did that. And you're right, that also became quite popular. So yeah, I think I'm quite fortunate that you have subscribers who keep telling you signals on what works, what doesn't work. I have a really strong editorial team that I lean on, who give me the freedom to basically say, yes, go for it. If this is going to work, just try it out. I always tell the story that when I finished writing the nut graph, the most scary 10, 20, 30 minutes of my entire week is the time when I know that desk is going through it. Because when they come back and tell me, and I know just by the responses, I know what's going to happen tomorrow. If they say done without any comments, I know, okay, it's an average piece. Okay. If they come and say good, then I know, oh, this has potential. Okay. If they come back and say, I loved reading it, then I know that's it. This is going to go viral tomorrow. So they have a lot of institutional knowledge, which really helps me. So yeah, so fundamentally, all of these things tend to work together. I'm quite fortunate.
Praveen, everyone talks of, in business, we talk of North Star metrics. As a product head, is there a North Star metric for you?
Subscriptions. No, I'm joking. So yeah, I think that's a good question. So I think, let me put it this way. So, okay, 2, 3, I don't think we have one North Star metric. I don't think we have gotten there yet, but I'll tell you 3, 4 metrics that we generally look at. We always started off by looking at subscriptions, but subscriptions for us, we sort of figured out over sometimes that slightly it's a bit of a derived metric. I mean, it's good. We do look at it, obviously, but it's a bit of a derived metric. So there are 2, 3 things we look at. Number one, of course, conversion is a very important thing for us, because we know that when someone comes to the website, it's very important for us because our funnel is not a regular funnel. A regular funnel is essentially where you have a website, somebody comes, they say, oh, get them to like get them to like sign up. And once they sign up and you've got them, you send them emails and get them to purchase. So the funnel is like this. That's not true about the Ken. So the Ken's funnel is a little bit like skewed like this. So what happens is you have a part of the funnel that is like that, where you have people who come, who look at this and say, I'm not sure. And they sign up and they go and this thing. And then over time, they end up purchasing a subscription. But you also have a significant part of the funnel of people who just come, look at a story and say, boom, I want to buy this now, and buy an annual subscription. And over 99.5% of our subscribers are annual subscribers. We don't have monthly. We have a quarterly subscription, but that is like a very, very few set of people do that. We don't offer a monthly subscription only because we believe that the value of the Ken cannot be realized in a month, quite honestly. So what happens is sometimes and so it's not a true representation of the product, which is why we don't offer a monthly subscription. But yeah, so the other interesting thing that we did, since you're talking about product and experiments and all that, is our single story. So one of the things that we have always seen is that people don't, the idea of, by the way, this is one of the big problems. You've spoken about problems in subscriptions in India, right? But this is the big problem, the overriding problem for us at the Ken is that, quite honestly, there is very, very few places that we can steal from. I mean, I mean steal product ideas or products or anything. There's very few places, quite honestly, which is not true about other places. You can always look at your competitors, even if they're abroad, and say, oh, this is a really cool idea. Let me integrate what Amazon is doing into Flipkart or something like that. Okay, but you can't do that here because in many ways, we are the first set of people trying to figure it out. So to get that right balance between this is an experiment versus this we are going to do because we believe in it versus this we are not going to do because our judgment says otherwise, this we are not going to do because our experience says otherwise, and to basically keep challenging those things and to keep understanding that on a day-to-day basis is not that easy. Otherwise, we can always look at other people and say, oh, we thought this would not work, but hey, they are making it work. Let's steal it now. We can't do that. So I'll give an example. So for instance, if you look at this, one of the things that subscribers don't really understand is this idea that a subscription is actually a commitment that you make for a long-term benefit. And it's not a benefit. It's exactly what you said sometime back, Rajesh, which is that if I subscribe for a year and if I get one idea, and I wish more subscribers were like you, if I get one idea over the course of that 1 year, my subscription is like, worth it. People don't see it that way necessarily. So they always look at it in a transactional way because they've been trained to look at it in a transactional way. All products teach them that this is all transactional. So for instance, one of the things that we kept getting asked was that there is this one story. I don't want your subscription. There's this one story. I only want to read this one story. And we always get these emails from this wannabe people who are like, who mean well, but they write in saying that, what you should do? You should sell this one story for like some 30 rupees. And if you sell it for 30 rupees, then we'll have more people wanting to buy it and your revenue will increase. And then I always reply back saying that, okay, assuming that is true, why do you think Netflix does not allow you to purchase one movie? And people then people start, they start looking at their own biases, their own assumptions, say, yeah, that's true. Why does Netflix not allow you to buy just one movie? I just want to watch this one movie. So now what ends up happening is we said, okay, we always said for a long time, look, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. We are a subscription. We are a loyalty play. But I think at one point in time, we looked at this and said, is there a way to make this into an opportunity? And this is what we did. So we just said, okay, let us launch a single story product. And it is basically, you want to buy one story, you can buy one story. But what you can't do as a subscriber is, you can't say that I want it at a price that I want. So we said no. So what we did is we priced the single story at like, I think 250 rupees when we started. And every 3 months, we just kept increasing it. We just kept increasing to 300, 350, 400, just to see, let's see what happens. Okay. I think now it's somewhere at 600 rupees. Okay. So the way it is right now, so if you go to a story at the page story, you go to the paywall, what you do is you see 3 options. Option 1, single story that says that it's at 600 rupees, a quarterly subscription, which is I think around 2000 rupees. And then you have an annual subscription at 3245. And what the single story did was, I would like to say that we planned this out, but we were like figuring it out as we went along, is that exactly. So what it does is people look at the single story, and then what it does is it creates a sense of value for the story itself. And then you have signal that, oh my God, the story is 600 rupees. And then when you look at the annual subscription, it does not look so bad in comparison. Although we believe that annual subscription is worth it. So here are some things we tried out and sort of worked for us. So things like this is, I don't know if the single story will continue. We keep trying out different things, but yeah, this is one of the several kind of experiments that we tried out and it has worked for us.
And also what's fascinating, Praveen, is that we are seeing a global trend now on this whole idea of individuals also now getting into the subscriptions mode. Substack is enabling that.
Yeah. So
absolutely. People are leaving well-known publications and saying, okay, correct, I'm going to start writing $100 a year. If I get 1,000, 2,000 subscribers, it's great. I think there's this smile curve in journalism, I think, which they talk about, where Google and Facebook on one side and the individual writers on the other side, 2 ends of the curve. Correct. And then the media companies right in between.
Yeah, that's correct.
So if I ask you when you think of the Ken going forward, you're really building a new generation media company. And it is that it's a business basically, where you're not dependent on advertising. There's value for the editorial. There are multiple products now. It's a diversified set of products, diversified geographies that you're operating in. How do you see this going forward? How do you see this playing out in the future?
So it's interesting you said this about the Substack model. And Rajesh, you probably remember this. I think there was this guy who basically said, maybe in the late 90s or in the 2000s, about this concept of 1,000 true fans. Right, which I think was Kevin Kelly, who basically said that if you can find 1,000 true fans for something that you have created, that's it. You are set. You can monetize it. And the thinking was that if you can create something that's really niche and you have if you're going to get 1,000 people to pay for, I don't know, the varieties of cheese and how to make cheese in this thing, If you get 1,000 people globally to pay for it, and each of them paying you $100 a year, that's $100,000 a year. You're comfortable. It's done. The thing is that's true. But the thing is, the number of people who can do that is also extremely small. So, for instance, most famously, Ben Thompson of Stratechery does that. I think a lot of people I have seen who get into Substack right now vastly underestimate the amount of grit, determination, and this thing that it takes to actually put out one quality stuff on a regular basis. People get into it, and they should get into it. It's fine. But to do it on a regular, consistent basis, and I can speak from personal experience, is not easy. And it's really, really difficult. So that's the first part. The second thing is that I think a lot of people lack the support structure that I'm like quite lucky to have, which is that I have a desk team, I have an editorial team, I have a visual team who are all like, who can just help me, even if they don't do so much for me, but they do what they do for me is like really invaluable. So to do it completely independently, not that easy. I will say this about the Ken going forward. See, our thinking is this in terms of ambition, that right now, we genuinely believe this. This is not something we say just in our like careers page and culture page. We genuinely believe that there is a potential to create something like the companies that we really look at is something like an FT, something like a Wall Street Journal, something like a New York Times. I read stories about how the New York Times has like transformed itself, like it just pulled itself and dragged itself into the 21st century. Really inspiring stories. And we believe that we can do that in India. We believe that we don't have the legacy behind us. We have the trust, we have this thing, and we have the subscriber base, we have the brand. Hopefully we'll make this work. So that's our first thing. And it's not just for India. We believe we can do this for Asia as well. But what that means is for us to do that, it requires us to solve problems, quite frankly, that we are going to be the first ones to solve those problems. And sometimes we'll get it right, sometimes we'll get it wrong. I hope we make less mistakes and more successes. For instance, one of the things that happened when we started, say, the Southeast Asia edition, and this is a story I haven't told, is we were very clear that it's a separate edition. And this is actually very weird because typically newspapers and media publications don't do this where you say, okay, you have edition 1, which is at this price that you can subscribe to, and edition 2, which is at this price that you can subscribe to separately. Typically what happens is you subscribe to one and you get access to one, and that's about it. And or you get access to the whole bundle in general. Now, how do you build this out? Is something that we actually searched a lot online. We tried to find out publications that had done this, and we really couldn't find anybody. And then we said, okay, look, we looked at it first principle and said, okay, if we have to build it out, we'll build it out this way. And we built it out. And we got contacted later by Automattic, somebody at Automattic who runs WordPress. And they were like quite astonished. They said, how did you do this? Because how did you build this multi-edition thing on WordPress? And we said, oh, we did this. So it turns out that the only example that they had seen of somebody doing this is actually e-commerce websites, which is true. Because if you have a product that is on, say, one store, like a Germany store versus a UK store, the pricing is going to be different. The products are going to be different. So we used that infrastructure and solved it for a media setup. So I guess we were lucky in the sense we basically spent some time and effort trying to solve this. There are other problems that we have to solve. Like for instance, we started off with paid newsletters. It was first free, then we moved it to paid. How do you make this work? How do you drive growth for paid newsletters? I suspect you're going to face similar problems with podcasts. Right now it's free. Maybe at some point in time, if you decide to do a paid version of a podcast, that's like unheard of. Who does a paid version of podcast? How do you even pay for it? How do you even access it? We know there's an opportunity, but we have to just figure out how to do these things. So I think solving problems that hopefully others have not solved, hopefully as quickly as possible in a way that works, is going to be our big challenge. And yeah, we think hopefully we have the team and the chops to do it.
Yeah, I think, and good luck to that, and I'll love to see that. But Praveen, just a small thing. When you come up with these variations in sense of you had the articles, then you had the emailers, and then you see the podcast. Yeah. Essentially, do you see them as different markets that help you increase the base, or is it going to the same person and either giving more value or being able to charge more premium? To my mind, there are three different reasons to have variations. What do you think?
Absolutely. So the honest answer is it's all of the above. I know it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but that's the honest answer. So for instance, I'll give an example. So if you basically see, and sometimes we have changed our mind about some of these things. So if you look at, say, I'll give an example of, say, newsletters, right? So when you started off with the stories are very straightforward. You pay for it, you get access to stories, and that's our flagship. It remains our flagship today. And when we started off the newsletters, our working hypothesis was that, look, the newsletters will, as you gave an example, will probably like travel, it'll go viral, it'll get into audiences that haven't heard of us, which it did. And it will like come back and people will come back, look at this and say, hey, now I'm going to pay for the Ken. Now that worked. I think it's fair to say that we looked at it and said, we think we can do better. We're not really sure if it's like, it's not, I would say that it's not really that clear if it led to that in a big way. Which is why we decided, you know what, this is probably much more valuable as part of the paid bundle. So that is why we basically put them behind a paywall and said, okay, look, our newsletters are now part for our subscribers because we believe that this is now so valuable that we think that people can pay for it and it will add that value. So we use that, we moved it from one category to another category. For instance, if you look at say podcasts today are free. So we do look at it as podcasts as something that we think will give us access to a new audience that is completely in a different format, hasn't heard of the Ken. But maybe we'll change our mind. Maybe that will work. And once we get enough people, we're like, okay, now we are done with this. And now we will make this paid. Or maybe we'll make another kind of a podcast that is paid. So I would say that it's all of them. We keep experimenting with all of them. We look at numbers really closely. We look at what we can do, instincts, feedback, all of that. And we make determination on all of these. So yeah, you'll see a lot more of these happening in like 2021, where we will start taking like stories, trying different formats with it, etc., etc. So yeah, so it's a combination of all of the above, honestly.
Right towards the end, Praveen, one sort of question.
Yes, please.
How do you think of pricing? Okay, and I'll tell you my view on that. You know, when Mint had launched, was a fantastic paper, and I had met Niranjan Rajadraksh, the editor, and I wrote about this on my blog also. I said, why on earth would you launch a 2 rupee paper?
Yes.
This is a product which should be priced at 15 rupees. You know, because you're going to go down the same path. You know, it's 10x differential, and of course they didn't do it, and tough then making money at 2 rupees and all of that, competing with Economic Times. And then, I mean, I look at today the value. I look at when I look at content or stories, rather, not content in your words.
See, I've transformed you.
Rajesh, you failed for 2 minutes, but it was a good comeback.
So, essentially, see what you're doing is this is not a mass market product, but there are at least probably I'd say a few lakh people in India for whom stories like this can be transformational, either in new business ideas, new business models.
Correct.
And my belief is that, you know, it's probably at 10 rupees a day or 15 rupees a day, it's still probably very, very low. And again, pricing it higher probably could be a way to go going forward. But how do you think of pricing? You know, why 3,500 or whatever equivalent?
Yeah, I mean, see, I could talk about pricing, just pricing for an hour, okay? But I'll give you the shorter version of what we are thinking about it. See, I wasn't here when we launched the Ken, but I know the historical context of why it came down to. So I think the thinking at that point in time was we said, okay, look, what is a good, if people look at this product and they say, they generally try to break it down into per month, how much do I have to pay for it? So at that point in time, I think the thinking was, well, 250 rupees a month would be like a good benchmark to begin with. So I think that is why the thinking was, oh, we can do it for like, so that means it works out to an annual subscription of 3,000 rupees. Then on top of it, then of course, GST came in. GST came in after we launched. So we had no choice. So then it obviously had to go up a little bit. So that is why it is at this weird price point of 3,245 rupees. So we said, okay, fine. It's all right. Let's not like, so the one thing we have never done is we have never, till now, we have not changed our annual pricing. Our annual pricing has remained the same for like 4 years since the time we launched. Our thinking is that our annual subscription is more or less, we like to look at it like how Amazon looks at Prime, which says that this is the thing and that is the main thing, as you say. And I think Amazon has changed its Prime price maybe like twice or thrice in like 20 years or something. It has barely moved its price. So I think we would like to look at it that way in terms of the annual subscription. What we have done is we have said, okay, first, we are never going to discount our price. We've been very clear about that. Till now, we have not done it. I think the only discount, there are only two kinds of discounts that we give. One is we give a discount of 50% for students because we feel like students deserve to read us and maybe can't afford it. And B, we give a small 10% discount to people when they renew their subscription. But quite honestly, a lot of people don't even like opt for it. It is just, I would like to say it as a like a thank you or a token loyalty or something. We don't even use it for like anything major. So that's two. In fact, every other way, the one thing we are very clear about is no person who buys a subscription to the Ken should ever write back to us and say that, oh, I bought it at full price, but now you're giving it at a bigger discount now. How can you do this? Or can you give me we didn't want that. We wanted that when somebody buys it, they're really confident that they cannot get it for less than this anywhere else. No matter what, there's no coupon out there. There's nothing out there. In fact, not even employees, even I pay full price for my subscription to the Ken. Rohin pays, he's like customer number one on the database, and he pays full price. So these are things we're very clear about culturally, where we basically say that this is something that we will never change, no matter what. What we do beyond that is we say, okay, what we can do for pricing is we basically play with pricing in other ways. So for instance, if you are an India subscriber and you want to buy a Southeast Asia subscription, then we say, yes, this makes sense because now you're getting more into the bundle. Sure. Now we will like give you like a discount for that. Or sometimes what happens is one of the things that we launched earlier is we launched 3-year subscriptions. And we did this, I think 2 years back when we were 3 years old. And we said, we didn't think we would opt for it. We said, okay, let's see what happens. And surprisingly, people did. It's one of our most selling products right now. So a lot of people who are really sold in just want to get locked in and say, just take my money, just send it to me. I don't want to worry about this renewal, nothing of the sort. I am sold on the quality. I'm sold on this thing. So send it to me. So there we play with pricing and we basically try to figure out how to do that. The other thing we played around with was we said, can we do a couple subscription? And that was also interesting because we had a lot of people writing and saying, I have a subscription, but my wife and I read the Ken together at breakfast or at this thing. And we're like really this thing. And you only have we can't have one app between the two of us. Can you do something for us? And we said, oh, okay, fine. So we built that out. So the way we look at pricing among all of these things is that, see, fundamentally, it's about, do you create enough value to the bundle itself in such a way that you can justify it? People, as much as you try, will try to bring it back to a monthly thing in their head, etc. But we want to believe that at the end of the day, the annual subscription is something where nobody should regret it. At the end of it, they should look at this and say, wow, in this annual subscription, I get like stories, I get like newsletters, I get this. This is great. This is my flagship. And if you make things, I have seen a lot of publications, and not just publications, other people also trying to do this complicated metrics of like a SaaS product kind of thing where you have like, you can get this also, add on this thing, etc. We try not to go down that direction. We may in the future, but we try not to. So yeah, in general, as long as you have one flagship thing where you can really justify the value, the rest of it sort of like emerges from there. So that's how we think about it broadly.
Well, it's been fantastic. Praveen, amazing insights, of course, into product, but also into the evolving and changing nature of the media industry. Great takeaways, I think. Amazing to also, of course, see your passion that you bring, your learnings from the past applied to creating really a new world out there. Jamit?
Yes, I think it's extremely interesting. And what I learned today, and I probably take it to the grave, is that, hey, these are stories, there's no content. So number one, I keep telling my guys, content, and then like I feel like slapping myself. And second, I never knew that you can look at stories. Once you look at stories, you look at it like a Hindi movie or a plot or something.
Hero's journey, Jamit.
So hero's journey, correct.
Exactly.
There's a complete Joseph Campbell all over again, saying
exactly.
There is a protagonist, there's conflict, there are issues. And what do people care about? They care about stories, and you have to write about it. And I love what, Praveen, you're writing, because at the end of it, it is a story that you're writing, and there is a narrative around it, as opposed to just writing content and trying to understand which are the keywords, how is it going to come. So actually, just before you, Praveen, we spoke to Karthik Rangappa from Zerodha, and he's also saying, I don't look at any metrics. We're not good at SEO. We're not good at anything. We write content that people want to read in a way that helps them. And you guys are writing content in a way that you think people want to consume and understand and fall in love with. It's like Bollywood. It's like movies. And that gave us a completely different insight. I came in thinking Praveen will talk about funnel, cohorts, this, that, and you're talking about, I don't know what stories. So I thought it was absolutely lovely, Praveen, and it's a good insight. And thank you. And thank you, readers and listeners. Sorry, not readers, listeners and viewers. It's been an amazing conversation with Praveen, who gave us an insight, I think, into unproductizing product at the Ken. and we got an understanding into how uncontenting content and make it stories at the Ken. And I think we go back with a lot of learnings that we can apply in various different places. Thank you. Do subscribe to us. Do like us. Do share the word. And hopefully we will get 1,000 true fans. Thank you.